the data type. Okay, it's not the C program data type, but it's declared in the declare section. It's a database SQL language block, SQL block. So if this one is defined in between during the pre-compilation, this D name will be converted to the C, the variable. Okay, later. So something like that. This one will be used for between host language and database. Okay. First, we need to connect. So there are different ways of the connection, but it should be between EXEC, begin and end. Okay. So because it's a database connection. Database connection, what information do you need? Username, password, and server information. At least 3. Okay. As you have tested in the lab. So username, password, and database name. Actually, it's a configuration name. Okay, that should be provided in this also. So this is the. Then finally, we can write the SQL like the select from where condition. Then we can add the into is the. We define this variable here. Okay, f name. The SSN. So this will be used in between. At that time, if you can see the semicolon means it can be used for host language also. In your host language, you can access the first name data, F name variable. Okay? And similarly, last name, address, salary. We can select such information and save in between the variable here. Then this one also from input, like the here, prompt. The SSN, then the submit, get the data, then using this, the F name, L name, address, salary, you can do whatever the C, the logic.
So basically
yes.
we are renaming the columns?
It's not rename, it's the storage, kind of the storage. The variable host language variable, but that should be used in between the SQL and host language. Okay. So this is the. But nowadays, not many applications are using the embedded SQL. But still, some of the projects still use such an embedded approach using C or C++. But in our exercise lab, we are not going to test with this one. Instead, we will use the API approach like the .NET and Java. Okay. So when we are using such an embedded SQL, the several slides before I skip the cursor. Cursor is what is the main problem of the database programming? It's a different data structure. Database use the group of data, but program language use the data itself. Then how can we address that problem? So we are going to use the cursor. Cursor is the kind of a room. So, for example, when I call my student, I just ask the student, my student. Okay, my student means it's a group of students. So, group of students will sit in my classroom. Okay, so that is the database approach, database data structure. Then, so this room is considered as such a cursor. So when I call, that means when I execute the SQL, select from where, then all students will be here. Then in our for example, in our career center, they will interview one by one by calling one by one student. So for me, I just call my student. I just execute the SQL, select from where, so as a group. In this room, but in host language, career service, the fetch, select one by one student. To do that, we need a temporary space. That is called the cursor. So where is it? It's a memory. So any program, the DBMS program, DBMS system, they should have such a memory area for the cursor. So this is even the one of the factor. the database administrator configure how many cursor, how many temporary space we need. The more the better, but you will consume a lot of memory, so we need to optimize space. Then from the cursor, we can fetch one by one from your host programming. Sometimes you may not use the directly cursor, which means automatically cursor is created and automatically fetched. But sometimes you can explicitly define the cursor, then fetch the data. Okay? Another technique that you need to keep in your mind in database programming, especially in your database program, the project in Facebook, this one, dynamic SQL, which means there might be static SQL. So, for example, this one. Select first name, last name, address, salary from employee where social security number input. We cannot change. We cannot change it. This is SQL, right? So always select first name, last name, address, salary from employee where social security number. So, which means when you implement this one, SSN is what? Then click. That's it. This is the only way to use this SQL. But sometimes, so you have the input like the social security number and major, and for example, the department, like this one. Sometimes student input only the social security number, student input major, student input only the department. How can we change? So we need to have 3 different codes, which is not convenient. Instead, we can use the dynamic SQL. Dynamic SQL means based on the input, we can dynamically change the SQL. How? First, we can define SQL statement string as a string. Okay? It's a string. So nothing. So first, select is it's a reserved word. So you can add this one. Select. If there is an option to like the first name, last name, address. So mark, check the last name and address only. So by considering this one, by considering user input, so F name is not checked? No. Last name? Yes. Then add, comma, and address, this. Okay? No more. Then from is a reserved word. Add. From is an employee. So add employee. Where if the social security number is added, major is null, and department is a CSE, by considering the user input, you can make the SQL where SSN is equal to this one, and N. Department is this one, and submit this SQL instead of the static. So this is called the dynamic SQL. Most 80 to 90% of the database programming are dynamic SQL. That's the reasonable, right? If you are using the only static, you need to consider all different cases, which is not possible in real life system. So this is called dynamic SQL. Dynamic SQL idea is we can assemble the SQL statement by considering the user input or condition. Okay, so this is a dynamic SQL. So, for example, we can define such a string, SQL statement string. Then, by considering user input, we can make the SQL statement. Okay. Then, how can we execute such a dynamic SQL statement? Prepare and execute. There is a separate command. What about the Java? Java has its own library. Okay. In .NET, .NET provides such a in ADO object. It provides such a the object to execute dynamic SQL. So JDBC we already discussed about it. It's a Java database connectivity. It's a to support. It's kind of a standardized of the database programming only for Java programming. Okay, only for Java programming they standardize. No matter what database you use, so it's the same. How is it possible? We can make the standardized the database connection in Java. How? Because database itself
It's pre-compiled.
not precompiled. It's standardized also. Because they are following SQL 3 standard or SQL 2000 standard, SQL standard. So they are not much different. So we can make the common database library. That is that. Yes, for example, Oracle has their own the feature in addition to the standard. Such an additional feature may not be considered in the JDBC. That's a limitation. But mostly it's covered. So that is the JDBC. So how can we use the JDBC program in Java? You need to download the pre-compiled object. That is the JDBC driver. Where can you download such a driver? Sometimes you can download from the vendor, which means the DB to IBM. You can download their own the JDBC library, or you can download from the Java community. Okay, Java provides a standardized. So basically the same idea: connect and submit the query and the close. We will skip the SQL J. SQL J is not much used. It's an example of the C programming. The third one is the stored procedure. Stored procedure is inside the DBMS. We try to provide the additional programming feature, such as the condition and conditional statement, or not the graphical user interface, but procedure approach. Okay, mostly it will be implemented by the function or the procedure. Okay, like this one. So we can create the data. These are the database projects. So you can do this one in the SQL Plus, for example. Then submit this one, then this procedure will be created. Later, in your database, you can execute this procedure. Function is the same. What's the difference between the procedure and function? Function has the return value. Okay, like I make the GPA function. So input is the list of object or the student ID. Output is the GPA. Procedure is the update salary. Update the salary. So there is no output, but database will be changing. So that is the procedure and function. And your trigger will be based on either procedure and function. Then you can call this procedure and function using call, or it can be used as the database object. That's called the SQL, PL/SQL, or sometimes it's a PSM, persistent stored procedure. So this is an example of the function. You can see it's a department size function. So input is what? Department number. Output is whether this is the huge, large, or medium department size. How can we implement? We can select the number of the employee from department, input department, then check. This if then else cannot be done in standard, the SQL. But using stored procedure, we can implement such a thing. Then later, after you create this one, department underbar size can be used in your SQL statement. Okay. More details, a little bit more detail. So we will see a little bit more details about the programming. The more important thing, just like as you are learning, when you are learning the new program language, the best way is type, compile, and execute, debug. Okay, that is the same thing. So during the exercise lab, why don't you try to understand how the database programming is working? Don't try to memorize all the syntax. It's 2 or 3 the books of the syntax. So syntax itself is, but idea is basically you can understand from today's lecture. So please try to catch it. What is the fundamental of the database programming? Then details you can learn in your exercise lab as well as your project. Okay. So embedded SQL. So it's basically using the pre-compiler, pre-processor. Okay. So we can use the exec SQL or exec SQL begin, exec SQL and in our program language. Okay. So this is an example of the C code. It's called the POST in Oracle. So this is the header in file for C program, right? Standard input and output, standard library, string. But this CSQLCA is the header information about SQL code in C language, okay? Provided by Oracle in this case, okay? So mostly standardized. Other Informix, other relational database management system use the similar, almost the same. Okay, then I try to define username and password. This one is in between the SQL block, which means this user ID password variable will be used for between SQL and host your C program. Okay, then what about this void SQL error type? This is a C code. It's a pure C code. Then we'd like to get the user ID. Okay, how can we get the user ID? So string copy from the array. Actually, you can get for example, you can use the command as an input from the file, from the standard input. Okay, or the file. So anyway, you can get in this case, you can actually assign the me to the user ID and no me to the password. But you can implement a different way, like the standard input. As a standard input, you can get a file, or in your programming, the user ID and password, okay, as the input. Then anyway, we can get the username and password, and exe is a SQL part is a connect, okay, user ID. So the reason why this is the semicolon is defined here as an in between. Okay, so then get the password, right? Then connect to the database. Then create the table tester using this user and password and insert the data and select the data. Then selected the maximum value of A into saved as the value. This is a semicolon. Then in your C code, you can use that value. This is a basic procedure how to use the embedded database program. Cursor, I mentioned about the cursor. When we are using the dynamic SQL, we can make the SQL statement and bring the data into temporary space. That is the cursor. How can we use the cursor? So for example, we can declare the cursor, okay, as info cursor. Okay, there are two ways. You don't have to create the cursor. Instead, you can use just your SQL. That means your database will create automatically cursor and save the data into that built-in cursor, then fetch. But sometimes you can reserve your own space using exec declare cursor. This cursor will execute only this query. Okay? So select from where this one, then you can declare this cursor like this, select the from reservation and open cursor, and you can fetch the data. Okay, this is how it works.
Professor?
Yes.
Yeah. If cursor is like, what is the difference between cursor and procedure? As PL/SQL script.
The PL/SQL also use the cursor when you submit the SQL statement. Okay. So in your procedure, if you select the data, then that data will be stored at the cursor. Cursor is a memory space in between your database and host language. Okay. So database use just a cursor is a group of data, but from your host language, the host language can access a group of data one by one, which is called a fetch. Okay.
And in cursor, we can only execute select statement, or we can execute any statement.
Only select statement.
Only select.
Yes.
Instead of PL/SQL, we can use it.
Sure. So this is an example of the cursor. So in this case, cursor is defined as a select from where and order by, and you can fetch one by one. When you declare and open, it will execute this one, then save the output into the memory space. Then from fetch, you can access the data one by one. That is the reason you can see the do while until end of the data not found. Data not found. So this is the data not found statement. So until data not found, you can fetch one by one. Then we can address the problem of the database and your program language. However, the main problem is we need to compile two times. One is a pre-compile that convert the SQL block into the host language, then host language compilation. So dynamic SQL, this is an example of the dynamic SQL. So we can define the SQL string, then assemble. Assemble your SQL statement by considering the input or condition. Then we can prepare, then finally execute. So this is more popular general database programming approach instead of the stack. So it's also a good idea. First, you can start from several static SQL database programming. When you then use, then try to more flexible. Try to make your application more flexible by considering dynamic SQL. Okay. So database API, the second approach. So first the JDBC. So JDBC is there is a driver. Driver means the library. Okay. JDBC library is a classified, and so we can the code such a driver. Okay, this class will be loaded in your Java virtual machine, then it will be used. So as we discussed, JDBC is a standard along the different relational database management system. So like this one, when you connect the database, it provides the same rule like the JDBC. It's always a JDBC, and the name of the DBMS, the type of the DBMS, Oracle Informix DB2, things like that, and this is the address of your database and the port number. It's always the same, the syntax. We see the example of the executing SQL statement. So we have the SQL statement, in this case insert. Can we make the dynamic SQL? Yes, by changing the SQL string. You can combine, you can merge, you can whatever you want. You can manage the massage the SQL, then we can make the dynamic SQL. Then we can prepare the statement and the submit. When you prepare the PS statement, it's a prepare statement, it will be stored and the result set, so we can get the one by one. We will see, I think that we have the result set. Result set is in the Java, JDBC connectivity, like the cursor. cursor is in between database result and your application. Similarly, it has the result set is provided by the JDBC. Okay, it's a result set is the set of the data. Okay, it's an array. Okay, so we can get one by one using the method next. So we can fetch the next. So result set provide several the more powerful the methods like the previous before and absolute value or the some other. So if you decide to use the Java for your project, you need to study details of the such a API. Okay, and you should be able to use the result set. This is an example of the JDBC code. So for example, this is our query. It can be easily the dynamic SQL by changing the query. Okay. Then this is the result set. Result set is by execute this query. Then the output of this one is stored at the RS. Okay. Result set. Then how can we access the one end of the data? So next for each one we can easily access the data. We can do whatever we want. The last one is a stored procedure. Stored procedure is unlike the first two approaches in the database. Okay, so database object. So basically it's create the procedure, then procedure name and the syntax. Also the create function. Create the procedure. So as you asked, you can execute any types of the SQL. Okay, you can insert, you can select, you can update. What about the using? Can we use the stored procedure in our database programming? Yes. Stored procedure itself is another type of database object like the table, like the index. So we can access such a stored procedure in our JDBC program, for example. So, for example, when we can use such a stored procedure, like if we have the very complicated procedure, for example, GPA. So if everybody need to implement a GPA, it will be much more complicated. And GPA rule may be changed. So why don't we create one GPA function? Input is student ID. Output is a GPA value. After you create, give the permission to be executed by any user. Any user can use the GPA function, like the maximum function, or the minimum function, or what else? The average function. So GPA will be general function. So that is the one way to use the stored procedure. Yes.
So if we use a stored procedure, so we need to precompile.
Oh no, you don't have to precompile. You just create the procedure first. Create procedure. Then procedure will be created on your DBMS engine. Okay.
Problem?
Yes.
In general, most of the applications use like stored procedure. They don't include auto statement in the regular code. So what is the performance benefit if we are using?
That's a good question. So performance. This is a big problem when you are using the stored procedure in small project or small application. It's okay, but think about you have the millions of users, and millions of users submit the GPA function. GPA function, for example, takes 1 minute to calculate. So your system will be very, very slow. So if your stored procedure, it needs a lot of the computation, or SQL itself, it takes a long time, it will be overhead of your entire system. So you should be careful to decide which one will be stored procedure. Instead, you can move stored procedure algorithm or function to your client module. So you can just download the data, then compute the GPA on your client. Okay? You need to decide which one will be better. So stored procedure, some of the project manager, they don't like to use the stored procedure because it's too much overhead. What if insert data or update the data in your stored procedure? Yes, you can do that, but during update, during insert, it will be locked also. So you should be careful to decide. But it is possible, sometimes it's useful. Performance is always problem to use the stored procedure. And also it's not standardized along the different DBMS system. So you will practice the PL/SQL is the example of stored procedure in Oracle. And Informix has the PSM, persistent stored procedure, and each DBMS has their own stored procedure. Okay? I'm not going to explain the detail, the syntax. You will learn in the exercise lab. Okay? Basically, the if conditional statement is the most important part of the stored procedure. If, then, else if, and if, or loop. Okay? And also function, the different from the different thing from the procedure is a test return variable. As you can see, there's a return. Okay. This is a function to rate. So output is rating is 1 or 0. That rating will be returned based on the number of the count, number of result. So we can, if you want to use the cursor, yes, we can use it to define the cursor. This cursor is to select the customer information. Then in PL/SQL, in the PL/SQL, you can use the cursor, your own cursor. Okay, so that is the very brief introduction of the database programming. But you should learn the more in your exercise lab and also project. We have 10 minutes, so as I announced,